Everyone knows the heart of a ship is the captain, but Anderson's orders haven't been working lately. He was up there screaming at night during the fishing. The crew is down there getting better. Anderson, to get his man's dignity back, picked a backdoor guy on purpose. That's right, the niece's boyfriend. Let's get him on the boom to test stability. If it didn't fall, it proved it. She'll get her niece a new boyfriend. This episode begins aboard the Mary. They just unloaded the cargo from the port, completed the cod quota to get the snow crab quota. Why don't you call Nathan and see what's going on over there? I was told the Russian border was not so peaceful. So the two abandoned the idea of going to the Russian border. Then he decided to retrieve the crab pot he had thrown in the harbor. The time came 14 hours later. The Mary came 140 miles north of Dutch Harbor. The weather here is really bad. They are now located at the crab pot release site before returning to Hong Kong. The crew then began the salvage operation. Josh doesn't expect much from these crab pots. Just want to get out of here and get somewhere else. Then the crab pot boat inside the chicken hair. In total, they put 40 in this location. Casey hopes to catch it before the Aleutian low arrives. The Aleutian Depression was, as its name suggests, a low-pressure storm. Its arrival will quickly pull the Arctic ice, allowing Arctic ice to hit the Bering Sea more quickly. As time goes by, the crew also pulled out most of the crab pot. Out came the crabs from the boat along with the crab pot, and a wave of waves. Then Kathy saw a big wave coming, hit the buzzer to get the crew out of the way. But this wave is a lot of thunder, but little rain. Not only are the crew safe, even the crew who tied a crab pot to it was fine. The crew continued to work after the crisis was over. The two above also began to explore new places. 120 miles southeast of the Legend. Anderson's on the phone with Sean. Sean tells Anderson the cod sale will be closed on Sunday. It's Wednesday, and Anderson has 3 days left. Sean said he would submit it on Saturday. The two then ended the conversation. Anderson talked about his plan to cast a cage. This time he's at 160 to 260 meters. One crab pot every 50 meters from shallow to deep. Before we get to the cage, the men on deck chatted. Cheyenne said she found a boyfriend. The boyfriend is also the ship's mechanic. And Anderson's favorite crew member, Mason. Favorite crew member fucked his niece, causing Anderson to freak out when he saw Mason, especially this morning. Anderson just got up to wash up. I saw them cuddling in the kitchen. Forget what Anderson was feeling, but watching Cheyenne spend so much time with Mason. They never had a fight or anything. Anderson acquiesced in their relationship. Now Mike below is talking to the two of them. Bala bala bala. 10 minutes after the time. Legend approaching target position. The crew also began to cast cages. One by one, the crab pots sink to the bottom. Anderson had a sudden sense of foreboding. That's when there's going to be an accident. The hydraulic pipe of the boom turns directly into a fountain. Anderson was confused again. I don't care if I can't catch a crab. Why do you have a crow's mouth? Anderson thinks it's a ruptured hydraulic hose. He then asked the crew to pick one up and replace it. The one crew member who can take on a big job is Mason. It's also the price of hitting on your niece. Anderson's got a little bit of a grudge. Mason, in his gear, climbed onto the boom. Cheyenne's down there holding Mason's rope. Anderson then directs Cheyenne to tie the rope to the guardrail. Watching my boyfriend up there hanging on by a thread, Cheyenne's grip on the thread tightened. It didn't take long for the sea to get rough. The boat began to shake. Mason up there is getting his pants wet, but it's a good thing Mason withstood the wave. This episode wouldn't have aired if we hadn't held the wave. In the next half hour, and the repair operation went off without incident. Mason is safely down on deck. The lifting arm can be used normally after maintenance. The crew also continued to cast cages. 370 miles southwest of the Fear. They are located in an area of low pressure south of the Aleutian. The storm was about 25 knots strong. Carl's got 48 hours to unload, and he's getting ready to scoop up the last 50 crab pots. This string of crab pots has to measure up. Carl gets to go home immediately and collect $1.5 million. The crew then began the salvage operation. The first cage on board the Harvest is quite good. The crew sorted out 44 more. Carl, who had not seen a crab for 2 days, was also quite happy. But it wasn't long before something unexpected happened. The second crab pot line is tied straight through. The crew tied an iron chain around the knotted line, trying to pull the crab pot up with a no-cut rope. The way to cut the rope is to pull the crab pot up, but then they have to go to the other end of the crab pot. This method is more cost-effective. As the knotted crab pot is pulled up, the crew is trying to catch up, but the accident did not happen unexpectedly. This impulse caused the crab cage rope to break. Carl had to take the boat to the other end of the crab pot, 280 miles away on the Mary. Due to the nearby storm, it's very restless. So Josh led the crew in prayer. May God protect the Mary from harm. After prayers, the crew went on deck, and the 2 guys on top have identified the drop point. Steer the ship to the target area, 390 miles northwest of the Witch. Keys is now just 1.5 miles from the Russian border. Took a huge risk to get here. Keith had a good harvest except the other day, and Nathan. And then the crab pot that I put in is all chicken feathers, since all the previous ones were deep water crab pots. So Keith is going to the shallows east this time. Arriving at their position, the crew began to cast cages. Keith now has 22 tons left on his quota. With any luck, we'll get it out before the pack ice arrives. Bad luck leads to death. Follow the crab pot into the sea one by one. The waves are getting rough. Then the view goes to the Mary. They're also in the target area. The crew began to cast cages. But I haven't dropped a few crab pots yet. There's a big wave coming right at you. Keith was also hit by a huge wave. Fortunately, these 2 waves are just more thunder than rain. The crews of both ships are safe. Keith was relieved to see the crew were okay. The crew then went back to work. Keith was getting upset with the weather too. 650 miles southeast of the pad. Carl now sailed to the other end of the crab pot. But I didn't find what I was looking for here. Start greeting Carl gas. But the good news is there's always a way out. Carl searches around the crab pot for half an hour. I found floaters. The crew then began the salvage operation. We have 45 hours until Carl's unloading time. This is Carl's last chance to salvage. In Carl's expectant eyes, floaters were fished out piece by piece. And then there's the crab pot boarding. But after sorting, there were only 29 crabs. Clearly not what Carl expected. In the second cage that followed, the reel can't pull the line again. Feels like a little more force and this line's gonna snap. Carl says it's because there's a big ridge down here. The line is probably caught in a rock. So he decided to take the risk of vibrating the take-up. Shake out the fishing line stuck in the rock. The crew then set to work. After the shock, turn the take-up to full power. As soon as I got it out of the crab pot, Carl shows the camera that he spilled water. Then 32 crabs were picked from the cage. There were 33 after the second cage was sorted. The harvest is exactly what Carl expected. The next cage had 46 animals, with the crew salvaging. View of the southern low-pressure area aboard the Legendary. The crew are fishing for yesterday's crab pots. It was 2 days before Anderson was due to unload. Anderson's minimum expectation is 500 pounds per cage. If they don't, they can't deliver on time. The fishing order is from deep to shallow. Turn with the take-up machine. As soon as the crab pot was on board, the crew began to croak. I thought I had a big one, and I got a big one. After sorting, count 3 fish. Not even a fraction of what Anderson expected. The crew then resumed the salvage. The second cage yielded about the same yield as the first. It broke Anderson's heart. The third cage after that is the same. Anderson laughed when he saw the harvest. But don't laugh yet because there's more to it. One of the crew members pushed his hand down on the cage. Didn't give Anderson time to react. The sailor jumped up in pain. After the pain, he fell to his knees and couldn't stand up. Get up and get back to your cabin. When I went back, my hand was red and swollen, probably broken. When Anderson found out, send the crew back to disinfect their hands. Because the crew's job is to throw anchor hooks. Anderson asked Cheyenne to take over. But Cheyenne's technique is ridiculously bad. 2 casts in a row and no crab pot. The wounded man was preparing a nutritious meal for himself. Cheyenne was up there being lectured by Anderson. You know, Anderson's a pretty nasty bitch. Cheyenne finally got it after more than a few attempts. When Cheyenne fumbled, Mason went to help. Anderson was so worried at the time. Get Mason out of here before it interferes with Cheyenne. Then the crab pot boarded, but the harvest was still not good. Cheyenne then went back to fishing for crab pots. Cheyenne's definitely improved this time around. Anderson quietly complimented it. And then the crab pot gets on board and the pot gets a little better. After sorting, Anderson assigned a new task. It's for Cheyenne to throw a crab pot rope. But Cheyenne was too weak to get up there. Mason is here to teach another wave. Cheyenne managed to throw it up this time. Mason was also on the sidelines praising Cheyenne's progress. Cheyenne then went back to fishing for crab pots. Anderson said, "Look at Cheyenne. You must hate your job right now." In this way, his purpose is achieved. After all, this little girl is a rebel. I had to let her try the social beatings. Meanwhile, Cheyenne on deck is making fun of Anderson. 680 miles north on the Wizard. It's 25 below zero here in Keith. The crew is de-icing all the time. After clearing the ice, we start fishing for crab pots. Day by day, it is very busy. Turn with the take-up machine. Keith's heart was in his mouth. I didn't catch anything for 2 or 3 days. We don't get Keith anymore, and we're in the factory. Then the crab pot board harvest is okay. There were 25 in the cage after the crew sorted them. Dude, 2 days ago, it was over 200 per cage. Today's harvest will be cut in half. After dropping the crab pot in place, the crew resumed the salvage. Then the second cage ship harvest is also okay. After sorting, there are 28 animals in the cage. No sooner had the sorting finished than the alarm went off. The crew hurried to the engine room. Keith says there's too much pressure on the engine, causing the oil to spill. The mechanic came down and hurried to repair. They're 550 miles from Dutch Harbor. There's no way to go back for repairs. Just hope the mechanics fix it. It wasn't long before the mechanic came for Keith. Then he says he can't fix it. All he can do is slow the flow of oil. Keith let him go down first. Just sit there and start using your smart head. For 100 miles southeast of the Mary, they've started fishing for crab pots too. Josh hopes to harvest 150 crab pots. No man, it's night. It's not for daydreaming. Then the crab pot boarded the boat with 2 fish and a crab. The second cage looks like the same bird. 400 miles northwest of the Witch. Keith calls Norman, the port repairman. Norman thinks the engine intake is blocked. He asked Keith to look at the engine intake. Then Keith got dressed. Before we get to the air intake, we see a big lump of ice. Keith hit him with a little hammer. The engine down there stops pumping oil. The glitch that's been bothering them all day. Let a professional mechanic fix it in a few words. The view goes to the legend. Cheyenne's getting better at it. The crab pot harvest is also increasing, with a cage of crabs on board. Anderson's quota is almost complete. The view goes to the Pat. They just pulled out the last of the crabs. The Witch was also harvesting. To the Winona in Dutch Harbor. Sean pulled in 113 tons of cod. Made $100,000 in revenue. The crew will be paid $8,000. Come aboard the Summer Bay. Bill pulled in 163 tons of cod. $170,000 in total. $12,000 for each crew member. Come to Anderson. He landed 118 tons of cod. $125,000 in revenue. Each crew member gets $10,000. That's the end of this video. Do you want to know what happened next? See the chart below for Captain's earnings.